Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. I was recommended a book the other day by a friend of mine who'd been reading a whole load of interesting books about the things that we've been told that are terribly bad for us. And he said, "Oh, you want to read this if you're into all this conspiracy stuff." And he recommended this book called The Untold Story of Milk. And I thought, oh, that's interesting because I like a nice drop of milk. I've stopped having, the breakfast cereals some years ago, realizing that they weren't actually full of anything. But I used to put milk on them, and I always thought milk was good for the calcium in your teeth and things like that. But I didn't know too much about it. And this book by Ron Schmid, ND, massive, great big tome of lots of reading, gave me a huge insight into the qualities and the benefits of raw milk. Now, I've got a farm shop just up the road, about 7 miles, which I do go to, and they have raw milk, and I've looked at that sort of somewhat dubiously, going, oh, should I have it? And, of course, you hear from other people going, oh, no, raw milk, mustn't touch that. So we're going to investigate the qualities and the benefits of raw milk, whether we should or whether we shouldn't, with nobody who is nobody who's more qualified. Hang on, I'll get this the right way around. Somebody who is very well qualified. There we go. Let's dispense with double negatives. Somebody who's very well qualified to talk about it. Sir Julian Rose has been on the show a few times before talking about organic food. Let's find out about organic milk. Julian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Richard. Delighted to be on.
It's lovely to have you back. You were telling me that where you are, you've got snow. I imagine that the poor cows are probably not out being grass-fed at the moment.
Well, they keep the cow. I'm in Poland at the moment. That's why there's snow.
Yes.
The cows, on the whole, are kept indoors in the wintertime. They feed them grass, which has been stored.
Yes.
And it's quite common that people drink raw milk. They just simply go to a farmer who has cows, and the farmer dishes it out into a jar and gives it to you, and you pay him something. There's absolutely none of this essential codes of practice, and you must have this, you must have that paperwork, you must have a license, and all that doesn't really exist in Poland for people who live in the countryside. For people that live in cities, it does. And that's the difference, you see.
Yes. Well, you can imagine that in a city it's much harder because
Yes.
you've got no fields, you've got no space for cows.
You
And
have to
people
know what
obviously,
you're buying. You don't
yeah.
walk up to the farmer because you trust the farmer. You know him, he's one of your neighbors. You see how he farms. You trust him, so you buy a bit of milk from him.
Yes.
That's the way of life which I think people are going to have to move towards in England.
No, absolutely. And it's a way of life that we've had. If you go strip back a couple of 100 years ago,
Yes.
we've lived like that in pretty
Much less than a couple of 100 years. When I was a boy, it was like this. I'm not
Really?
100 yet.
No.
I'm getting on that way.
Well, you look very sprightly, if I may say so, Julian. But so we are being told by the government and by various bodies that milk has to be pasteurised. That the system that came around the 1920s or just before, I think it was. I've got to remember all my facts. I didn't write them all down from
Yes,
this book.
the pasteurization came in the 1920s in England.
Right, and I was reading now this book is based in America, but
Yes,
one of the things the author says in there is there was as they were trying to supply milk to workers in the city at the turn of the century, they realized they needed to, because of lack of trains and things like that, or lack of keeping the milk fresh, they brought them in next to whiskey distilleries. And they were feeding them the grain that had gone through the whiskey process straight out of that to cows in these massive industrialized pens. Wow. Where they had no room to move around, feeding on this substandard food, and then giving them what I forget what they call it now. They had a specific name, milk to anybody who wanted. And it was really cheap, but it wasn't doing anybody any good. And people were getting ill, and then they thought, well, perhaps we ought to, Louis Pasteur was doing his experiments, and so then we got this pasteurization, where you heat it to, I forget what it is, 86, is it 87 degrees
Yes,
centigrade?
about that. Yeah. And then drop it
Something,
very rapidly to around about 3 or 4 degrees
and
over a period of
supposed,
about 15 seconds, the whole thing. Yeah.
yes, and that's supposed to kill out all the bacteria and all the stuff.
And
And
the
of course,
problem is, Richard, we may as well get straight into it there.
yes,
You've used the very words I would have used, all the bacteria. And the
right,
theory, which started probably in America, because they're absolutely crazy about hygiene over there,
yeah,
is that bacteria are essentially dangerous, you know. But they did seem to figure out that every time you breathe in about 13,000 different sorts of bacteria. But nevertheless, bacteria is considered a dangerous word. So you shouldn't have bacteria in anything. So you had to mass pasteurize to try and get rid of all the bacteria. But the big problem with this has been that you also kill the good stuff.
yes,
You kill the good stuff. In fact, 10% of vitamin B1, B6, B12, and about 25% of vitamin C are immediately killed in the pasteurization process. And it also affects the body's ability to absorb something called folate, which is very important for giving birth. And there are a whole number of statistics like this, which show that it's a very denatured product, what you're getting once you've been through the pasteurization process. It shouldn't be called milk, in my view, because it's a gross distortion of what milk actually is. Raw cow's milk produced correctly on grass-fed cows that range outdoors, etc., and eat hay and all the rest of it is very close to being perfect in terms of its nutritional content, almost like breast milk. It's the closest you'll get to human breast milk. So its potential as a health-giving key health-giving dietary factor is very, very significant, especially for young. When you get older, there's an enzyme in the body which we lose, and the ability to digest milk becomes reduced. But as children, right up, to late teens and even possibly early 20s, that still exists. And I was brought up in my family drinking unpasteurized milk. My 2 children have drunk unpasteurized milk. I've always drunk unpasteurized milk, and we all had extremely good health. So it is one of the key factors, I think.
yes. And I mean, the book goes on to talk about, well, the hygiene of the process of getting the raw milk was probably where people who were getting ill, because all sorts of other things
Indeed.
you wouldn't normally get
In that case,
in there.
yeah.
Yes. But once you cleaned the process of getting the milk from the cow to your mouth,
Yes.
then of course you're getting all those wonderful benefits.
Well,
Which is
the best way of all is I mean, I milked a herd of cows on my farm. We had 50 Guernsey cows right up until about year 2000. And I can tell you the best way of drinking milk is just you squeeze from the cow's teat straight into a grass and you drink it.
yeah. I mean, you can't get
Let-
more
let's,
basic than
let's
that.
get down to basics. That's
Yes.
the best way. It's even
Yeah.
slightly warm still, which is quite nice. But actually, the next best thing, and that's the way raw milk producers do in the UK and on the continent, supply milk these days, is you basically use a vacuum sucking type of equipment. You put on the teats of the cow and it sucks the milk out. It actually imitates the process of pulling the cow's teat. I'm just saying that
Yes.
like that.
There we go.
It imitates
I'll give
this.
you. Yes.
And it sucks the milk out and takes it in through a stainless steel pipe into a stainless steel container. And that container is kept at a cool temperature. And once it's in there, it's only a question of then taking it into the next stage, which is to fill bottles or cartons or whatever it may be. This is raw milk I'm referring to.
Mm.
Now, you have to be scrupulously careful. I was partly joking initially when I said all bacteria have to be killed. Of course, some nasties will get in occasionally, but this is a really key issue now. The human immune system should be able to deal with those. And up until maybe 40 or 50 years ago, it did. most, apart from the really key problem issues like listeria, tuberculosis, to a certain degree, brucellosis, when these were problems in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, those were cured by adopting sensible hygiene standards and training farmers, how to really do it. Because don't forget, when milk became mass produced, it was no longer delivered directly to a neighbor all over England from a local farm. It was transported in huge bulk tanks into a central holding area where it's all pasteurized, etc. there. And only from there is it again bottled and shipped out. So that's one of the reasons why pasteurization was introduced, because if there's a problem in that milk, you can't trace it back to the individual farm that might have caused the problem. You see?
Yes.
Whereas if you do it locally, like I was selling everything bottled to my local residents. I had about 60 or 70 customers, and I was one of the only titled milkmen in England, I think, probably. And my milk was very popular indeed, and the cream, particularly.
Yes.
So, and the point is that they knew who I was. They knew how I produced it. I invited everyone to my farm at least twice a year. They looked around, and all the rest. We had a farm shop later on too. So you see, that's the thing that we've got away from. So
yes.
Then you're immediately in compensation. If you're going to be non-local, you have to compensate. So you have to compensate through mass pasteurization, which is killing all the best qualities in raw milk.
And the milk that you were producing was from one herd.
Yes, from one herd, precisely.
From one herd, and again, I mean, it all comes back down to the grass and the food that they're eating.
Yes.
The one herd, the land, the locality of it.
What they're eating, it needs to be diverse, biodiverse. You want clovers and various herbs in your pasture, not just grass, or maybe 2 or 3 different types of grass as well. And all of this pertains to the flavor and the quality of the milk.
Yes.
And once you get involved in this, you start recognizing what a cow is eaten by drinking the milk.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, it's rather like wine tasters with that sort of superior Bordeaux.
Well, and that is, I mean, isn't that very interesting? You mentioned wine, and people go to the nth degree to get wine from a specific vineyard at a specific time because of the flavors and the unique quality, the nose and all of those things. Yet when it comes to a lot of everyday commodities, like milk, people are quite happy just to pick it out of a fridge with no notion of where it's come from, whether it's British or from anywhere.
That's very true.
Mixed herds and then homogenized, so you don't get any cream or any of that.
Now, you touched on homogenization. You're absolutely right, Richard, about that. Homogenization is another very, very destructive process. The homogenization of milk is the idea that you need to put cream and milk together as one mass goes against nature, because cream floats to the surface of milk. You probably remember this when you were younger.
With the milk bottles with the cream and
the
gold tops and all of that.
The birds were always trying to pick a hole in the cap.
Yes.
And then the cat got in there and tried to get it. So that the cat gets the cream became a very famous thing.
Exactly.
So the point is that cream rose to the surface, and then you could skim it off and use it for whatever you wanted to, or you could, eventually mix it in yourself. But homogenization forces milk through a perforated copper plate at huge pressure, and it actually upsets the entire energetic balance of the milk in the process. So you've got pasteurization, homogenization taking even further away, and you've got the ultimate problem, ultra heat treated milk.
Yes.
Which is absolutely killed off everything that's good. And it's a dangerous product. There was a doctor in Edinburgh who I was in touch with during my milk campaign, who said it's causing heart attacks, drinking this
UHT
milk. Yeah, and he was vilified, and he lost his job. But that sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Doesn't it just? How many eminent doctors who have railed against what is being pushed has suddenly found themselves on the wrong side of everything. I
found myself on the wrong side of what was called the Milk Marketing Board. And this was the main government board responsible for milk right up until about 2010, 25 maybe. And I met someone who worked there who said, "You're Julian Rose." Yes, he said, "Your name was a swear word at the Milk Marketing Board." I said, "Wow, that must be good."
Yeah, that's
Must have achieved
interesting.
something.
Well, this is it. I think we're flying very close to the mark again. So tell me now. I remember in our previous conversations, I can't remember whether it went out in the actual recording or it was just something that we were chatting about before, because you were, in your own words, instrumental in preventing raw milk from being completely taken out of the public arena
Yes.
or being permitted that we could still have raw. I mean, the very idea
Yeah.
that a government could stop you from drinking fresh milk from a
Yes.
cow is a nonsense. So
Yeah.
tell us what happened in your case.
Well, it was extremely interesting. Actually, it was in 1989, and then again in 1997. I had to do this job twice, as it were.
Blimey.
I was only 5 years into my farming career in 1989, um, and I built up a herd. By then, I had about 14 cows, and I was just starting. I was just really expanding my local milk round, and the news suddenly came through on the paper that I was buying unpasteurized milk to be banned. And I thought, good God, what's this? And it turned out to be an attempt by the government to circumvent a problem which had come from listeria in a cheese made in Switzerland, a raw milk cheese made in Switzerland called Brie de Meaux, famous, very, very high quality, delicious cheese, incidentally, which apparently had got into England. And the government suddenly said, this is a dangerous cheese because there are traces of listeria that have been found. Okay, that was the only reason that they could find to try and introduce a blanket ban of all unpasteurized milk sales, of course.
Mm.
So what happened was I had an extremely intense sort of experience, which is I have to start a campaign. It was not easy because I was running my farm as well, of course. And I was in touch with a colleague who was a food writer called Marwood Yateman. And he and I got together and we planned this out. And we put an advertisement in a magazine that existed at that time called The Milk Producer. And we said all milk producers of unpasteurized milk who now see what their fate is, do sign up to this organization, the Association of Unpasteurized Milk Producers and Consumers. And we really got quite a good number of farmers. I think we got 75 farmers out of around about 120, 130 who were
Right.
at that time.
Yeah.
All joined up. And then what happened was really very remarkable. Someone rang me up and they simply said this, would you like me to help you with your campaign? So I said, well, of course I do. And who are you? He said, I'm someone on your milk round. Oh, good. Yes. Well, so you know the value of it. Yes, of course I do, they said. He said, I'm the lead newscaster for ITV News.
Wow.
And I can get the team up to your farm tomorrow if you're interested. I couldn't believe my ears.
Gosh.
And this is what changed everything. So I had an instinct about this, and I immediately rang the BBC. And this is where it's at. I said, this is where the story is breaking. I can arrange it for you. You come in the afternoon. It's on a Sunday because I'm busy in the morning. That was ITV.
Yeah, didn't tell them that
in
though.
the afternoon. And I got both in one day. And I was on the main headlines of the news that evening, explaining why pasteurized milk is a disaster and unpasteurized milk is wonderful for your health. And that led to a whole lot of interviews, breakfast television and articles. And I don't know, it went on like this for about a month and a half to 2 months. I wrote to Mrs. Thatcher about it. She wrote back to me saying, I have some sympathy with your views. And I thought, okay, we've won. If she's saying this, small business in the countryside is what I said. I didn't make a big point out of milk. I said small businesses in the countryside being destroyed, quality businesses,
Yes.
food businesses, unpasteurized milk, for example. Yes, I have some sympathy for you. And then at the famous Festival of Food and Farming, when I took a cow up to London demonstrating this issue, I was approached by the agricultural correspondent of the Daily Telegraph. And he said to me, you know, Sir Julian, um, I want a bold headline for the Sunday paper on this subject about the milk. Can you give me some idea? So I said, yes, I actually can. And I only just found this out recently. The Queen only drinks unpasteurized milk, Queen of England.
Yes.
They all do. It still goes on.
Yes.
So he said,
They're
thank
not,
you.
I mean, they might be strange people, but they're no fools when it comes to health.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. So he said, all right, and disappeared. And on Sunday, what came round, there was the banner headline, Queen's Royal Pinter to be banned.
Yes. Wow.
Wow.
And of course, these are in the days before the internet, before any other,
Yes,
competition
yes.
of things. People were reading papers and watching mainstream media.
So we won then. You know, it was all done in 2 months. And I put a
Gracious.
huge amount of time and energy into this, of course.
Yes.
And one of the things we did was, and this is strategically one of the things that helped a great deal. We wrote a leaflet, a small leaflet for the unpasteurized milk producers and their customers, which explained the benefits of unpasteurized milk and the problems to do with pasteurization I've just explained to you. And we had a tear-off slip at the bottom of it saying, send this, I believe in freedom of choice. That's all it actually said. I said, send this in to me. I'll take it to the Minister of Agriculture. So every milk round distributed these to their customers. The customers tore off the sleeve saying, I believe in freedom of choice. Sent them to me, and I had 15,000 at the end of my,
Wow.
by the middle of, I think it must have been May by the time this happened. And I took them to the Minister of Agriculture and dumped them on his desk, you know. And he said, yes. He said, well, Julian, however, you know, we are going to have to introduce a restriction. And I said, really? He said, yes, we accept that the campaign to ban is no longer valid, but we are going to have a health warning on the bottle or carton. This milk has not been pasteurized, therefore may contain organisms harmful to health. And I couldn't stop that.
No.
No, that was where I had to pull out. I said, this is ridiculous, but I couldn't do anything about it. So I said to my customers and to my colleagues who joined up with the Association of Unpasteurized Milk Producers and Consumers, I said, put your own message on the back saying how wonderful it is. And the government forces you to say this. And a lot of people did. A lot of people said the government demands that we state this milk has not been pasteurized, therefore may contain organisms harmful for your health. But really, the truth is, it's a wonderful product.
Absolutely. But what an amazing story. And I love the simplicity of we want freedom of choice.
Yes.
Because how do you argue against it?
Yes, exactly. And so, you know, we want freedom of choice is really the big issue for us all today. And this is just a very interesting case of why they really couldn't, yes, as you rightly say, they couldn't refuse that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, that very notion on so many other issues with food, particularly, not just milk, but other issues as well. We want freedom of choice.
It's very different.
Yeah.
And now we're living in a time where that freedom of choice has been very, very severely curtailed. And it's being curtailed on all fronts. You know, it's being psychologically curtailed. It's being physically curtailed. It's being spiritually curtailed. On every front, there's an attempt to block our creativity, our desire to live a pleasurable, good, honest, healthy life. And we're being told that this is all bad for you. You must eat dead food from the supermarket. That's the only safe food. That's the only food that hasn't got any bacteria in it.
Highly processed. Stripped of minerals and vitamins.
Exactly. And one thing I would like to add concerning cream, because, you know, there's a big bugaboo about cholesterol, which has all been disproven now, but it took years to disprove it. the big deal was, oh, you can only drink semi-skimmed milk or skim milk because full milk's cholesterol oriented. You're going to get high cholesterol reading if you drink this product. It was an absolute lie, no truth in it whatsoever. So the very interesting thing happened while I was running this campaign, which is a team of doctors from Japan came to England and asked me if I could advise them why they could go to farms with the reducing high butterfat levels of milk and just leaving the milk standing so that they could come and skim the cream off, old-fashioned way, skim the cream off and take it back with them to Japan, where they were making a kit specifically to fight against cancer. So it had antimicrobial qualities, it had anti-cancer qualities, and they said the enzymes in the cream are the key.
Wow.
This is what contains all the goodness is in cream. It's the exact opposite from what we're told.
Absolutely. So before I came on, I thought, let's just see if there's anything on the government's website or whatever that tells us whether raw milk is good, bad, or indifferent. And I happened to find this, and I'll just whack this up on the screen here. Here it is. This is at cdc.gov. And that's the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention, Centre for Disease. And it's put milk on that. Food safety, here we go. Raw milk questions and answers. And it starts right from the start. Raw milk is a milk that has not been pasteurised to kill harmful bacteria, just as you said. Raw milk can carry harmful germs. Well, I'm sure it can, but it doesn't mean that only if it's unhygienic. But it then mentions some which I can't even pronounce without making a fool of myself. You can see them on the screen. These germs pose serious risks to your health. Then it comes down here and again it says, what are the risks associated with drinking raw milk? Raw milk, again, is not being pasteurised. Raw milk can be contaminated with harmful germs, and I'm sure anything can be contaminated. So they're not really saying anything there. People who get sick from raw milk may have, and it lists the whole things, diarrhea, stomach cramping, vomiting, etc. And then it goes on. But I come down, and people can go, I'll leave the link in the description so people can look at it. Can raw milk hurt me or my family? Yes. Straight away, it's not giving you any leeway whatsoever.
No.
And it goes on, and it goes on, and it goes on. Yeah, pages and pages of this
stuff. Isn't that something? Now, I hadn't looked at that site for quite a long time, but I want to say something now which will ease the minds of people. Of course, everyone will be obviously concerned about the quality of the product that they're buying. And I can tell you this, it's very stringent what you have to do in Britain to produce raw milk. It's very stringent. You do have to register. You do have to send samples every 3 months to a laboratory to be tested for some of those products that you had on the screen. You have to have inspections regularly by the Ministry of Agriculture or a local veterinary service or whatever. And you are in serious trouble if your total bacterial count, it's called, is above a certain level, which they consider safe. If you exceed that level more than 3 times, they can take your license away.
Gosh.
So actually, it's a very stringent, difficult process to have to undergo. There's a lot of paperwork involved. There's a lot of concern because some of the people that come out there to inspect your herd and your farm to make sure your muck heap is sufficiently distant from where you're milking your cows are not the most helpful people. Sometimes they've got something that they would like to be making trouble about, so etc.
Yes.
So you have to try and deal with that as well. So what I want to do now is simply to assure those people who would like to purchase unpasteurized milk. The good news is that it's very easy relatively now to find it. There are a lot of different farms, small scale family farms, basically producing high quality unpasteurized milk. And you can find on the internet, if you simply put something up saying find raw milk UK, you'll find a whole list of different places and some with maps which show you the one nearest to where you're living.
And it would be
So
also
basically, it's surviving and it's thriving.
good. Well, that's the good news. And I'd love to hear from people who are in different countries as well
Yes,
about their experience with raw milk and share
yes.
those in the
Well,
comments.
in France, you can buy it in supermarkets. The only country I think you can,
Oh,
because
right.
in England, you're not allowed to sell it in anything other than your own farm shop or on the milk round, of course, bottle on your doorstep or farmer's market. It's completely
Yes.
restricted. That's all. You can't sell it in shops, schools, institutions, catering establishments, none of it. It's illegal.
Can you freeze raw milk and then unfreeze it for consumption? In other words,
You
buy a job lot and put
Right.
it in, and
People
then.
do this. I don't recommend it.
Mm,
Actually, you can more effectively do it with cream, but not the milk part. The milk
right,
is difficult. You get a lot of little pieces of ice and a sense that it's been watered down once it's defrosted.
right.
Cream,
Oh,
you
okay.
can do it with cream. Cream still stays together, holds together.
Yes. Right. Oh, that's interesting
Yeah.
because the thought is if your nearest farm is say 30 miles away and you drive over and you say, oh well, I'll get 12 liters or 20
Yes.
liters, stick it all in the freezer, and then I've
Yes.
got a supply.
Yes.
It may not be the best
On average,
option.
you could say 3 or 4 days, perfect condition, raw milk. There's very little difference between that and pasteurized when it comes to keeping power.
Right.
Very little different. Cream, I kept my cream for a month, not in a refrigerator, and it didn't go off at all.
Well, I suppose that's the other thing that we forget, that there was a time before fridges, and people had larders and
Larders,
cool rooms and things like that.
larders.
And again, the modern world that we live in is really an illusion to what we've had for generations.
Generations.
Um,
And what's more, the top cheesemakers all over the world, and particularly in France, England, and continent, they all say you should never put cheese in the fridge. You put it
yes,
in your larder
right.
because it's you'll never get the flavor unless you keep it on a relatively ambient temperature. And of course, we're talking about very, very high quality products, which just again, like the wine we're talking about, demand very, very specific treatment to get the best out of them.
Yes. And again, well, that's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because if we are principally buying our food, as most people are, from supermarkets, their palates have not been trained or exposed, perhaps is a better word, to the wonderful flavours of quality products. And if you're putting things like tomatoes in the fridge and then you just bring them out and eat them and go, well, there's no flavour in that, it's because the flavour has been lost.
Yes, it has been, unfortunately, more than the flavor, because on average, most what's called fresh food in the supermarkets, traveled over 12,000 kilometers and has lost virtually all its vitamins and
Yes.
nutrients and
So
food
it's probably
quality.
not had the flavour to begin with.
Yes, so it hasn't got a great deal of flavor to go, or something
No.
still managed to hold
Yes.
on to their flavor. And then, of course, you rightly say, then what flavor there is left is destroyed by putting them in the refrigerator or freezer. Well,
Yes, absolutely. I wanted to read a little bit, if I may, and then just get your thoughts on this, a couple of paragraphs from this book, which I have been,
yes,
as I say,
sounds
early
very
in
interesting
the
book.
book.
Yeah.
So this is, as I say, it's in America, and this is around 1905, and the chapter I'm looking about is the history of the milk cure. And it explains by the word cure, the old-fashioned word of cure wasn't necessarily coming to an end of a chronic illness. It's a way of managing it. It would be, I suppose we would call it, what would we call it now when it's an ongoing cure?
Yes, yes.
Anyway, you get the gist. So let me just read this out and see what you make of this. In 1905, Charles Sanford Porter, MD, published Milk Diet as a remedy for chronic disease. The book went through 11 editions, the last published in 1923. At least 18,000 patients have taken the treatment under my direction in the last 37 years, Sanford wrote. A good food is a good remedy, and as disease is only a disturbance of the mechanism of nutrition, it is only natural that the use of milk in ill health should be almost as old as it is as a food in health. He goes on, as milk is full of living elements of vital character, it is obvious that the application of heat will have a serious detrimental effect on its value. And as soon as I read that, I thought, I've got to read that out, because
That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. It is so true that actually we could spread that out beyond milk into food in general, that food in its proper state is medicinal. It is medicine. So, for instance, we can go into our gardens and we can pick something, straight off the bush or whatever, and we can pop it in our mouths. Our immune system is being given a fantastic boost. The energetic level is being increased. Our ability to resist disease is being increased. So actually, it's medicinal. When it's at its highest quality, it's a fine medicine. And so milk is no exception to this, quite obviously. But milk has been perhaps one of the most contaminated, or well, that's not the right word, but denatured foods of the last 100 years. There was during the war, GPs in England were trying desperately to hang on to the raw milk as just what you described, as a medicine, basically. And there was a huge argument within the National Farmers Union about this. There were those who were saying everything has to be pasteurized because we've got to get modern, and we've got to give London milk, and we've got to have huge tankers taking it, and we can't afford to risk the fact that some farm might have had bad hygiene, and therefore we have to have everything pasteurized. And the doctors were arguing in favor of this being a big problem. This is not going to help our patients. We're advising our patients not to have pasteurized, but have unpasteurized. So it was a major issue in the UK. There's a whole lot of papers that I've got, which I found as the course of my campaign, from the National Farmers Union, from other bodies who were involved in this, and doctors, local GPs. And Dave's letters are fascinating to read.
Yes, I can imagine. So, looking to the future, I mean, we are in this very pinnacle point, I think, in history at the moment, where a number of people, and rising all the time, are beginning to realise that the way that our sophisticated world has come about is perhaps not so advantageous to us after all. The highly processed foods, the pasteurization of milk, and a whole load of other things. That something in the past, and quite a lot of things in the past, were extremely beneficial. Yes. And particularly the localism, the seasonalization of things, seasonalization, that sounds horrible, the seasonal nature of food, yes, and the local food, and having farms around you.
Yes. Yes.
So that and things like honey, that is, it is there from the local flowers and grasses and what
honey and eggs, for instance.
Exactly. And I think hopefully people are beginning to realise that this is something we've got to return to.
Yes.
And it's not that we're shunning technology, good technology that isn't surveilling us and all the nasty stuff it can do, but actually stop us from having to work, say, the long hours and getting ill in all cold and miserable weathers, but being reconnected with the soil and reconnected with the land. And I can tell from what you're just saying there, nodding along, and I know this is your theme.
It is my thing, very much so. Well, I do think there are signs, indeed, that more discerning, thoughtful people looking around them and putting two and two together, connecting the dots of what's going on this planet, can see that everything's falling down towards the lowest common denominator. But, we're no fools any longer. We know that at the top end of the spectrum, at the sort of cabal end where people are running banks and corporations, etc., those people are getting the best. But the ordinary bloke on the street is getting closer and closer to being told, I'm sorry, it's a pity you can't afford this other stuff, but we're making it possible for you to have food.
Yeah.
And
only it's bugs and insects and yes,
but it'll be
vile.
Between you and this is the lowest common denominator. So, in fact, we are destroying people's health en masse by doing this. I don't want to use this word. It's a form of genocide. It's deliberate. It isn't by a mistake or, whatever. It is deliberate. And this is the tragedy. And I think we have to take control of our own destinies. It's the only thing we can really do now. We're not going to persuade politicians to make the changes.
No.
They won't. Apart from one or two very rare ones, they toe the line, whatever they're told to do. And it comes down from up on high, It comes down from the corporations and the military industrial complex. And at the top end, we're just interested in money and power. Everything comes from that. So basically, we have to take control of our destinies, which means we have to relearn the art of growing our own food. And if we can't do that, we can at least learn how to distinguish between quality and very, very poor quality. And we can know where to access it, and know what we can afford to do. Budget carefully. Don't bother to buy so much junk food. Buy one or two really good items. Eat less altogether, because we really don't need 3 square meals a day. We probably need 1.5 at the most. And everything needs to be reassessed on the lines of what's good for you, what feels good, what makes you happy, what gives you an energetic feeling about living, and really ignore the rest.
Yes.
You will run into some problems, of course, in the process of trying to establish this as a lifestyle. But more and more people are, and those people will eventually link up. It's what I call arcs. It's like Noah's Ark, little Noah's Arks, So when the flood comes, we will connect with each other, and we'll help each other to survive. And I don't think we'll just survive in a miserable sense of that term. I think we'll survive and thrive, because we will have got back to what is basically and fundamentally truthful, honest, and good quality, and disposed of all the stuff that's pretense and is just a cipher, fake food. And that's a direction we're going in. And I think it's very exciting.
And I totally agree with you. I mean, Julia and I, my partner Julia and I, we went to the farm shop because that's where we get our food now. I get a veg box for veg, but we go and get our meats from the farm shop. And it's interesting, I was in there and somebody came and says, I watch your shows. I said, oh, and he says, come to the farm shop. And now I'm beginning to meet these people and saying, yes, this is what we're doing. And the great thing is, if you can't grow it yourself, you can support those that do.
That's the point.
Absolutely. So that
and
you're
they
building
need supporting desperately.
Yes,
they desperately need supporting. Their days are, so to speak, numbered if the government will have its way, and if Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset has its way, and the Green New Deal, and all that fakery.
Yes.
So we're the only people that can support them, and then we can form a very good and interesting alliance and learn a lot by being supporters. And they'll be more than happy.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Julian, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Well done for all your stuff in the past for keeping raw milk on the tables. That's been brilliant. And you're still farming, and even despite the snow.
Yes, still farming. Like here in Poland, we have 1.5 hectares of land, and we're 80% self-sufficient in vegetables. And we get the other stuff, eggs. We have hens, sheep, and 2 alpacas, and a dog and a cat. And we get the other stuff that we eat from local people. Local organic farmer.
Oh, fantastic! I'm told that alpacas are good guard animals.
They are. Yeah.
They keep the foxes and
all
of that. Yeah,
they do. And your dog.
And your dog, yeah, there you go. So, think about having an alpaca in amongst your chickens and you'll be all right.
Yeah.
It's been wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much. It's always encouraging and motivating speaking to you. And I hope that anybody watching, thinking about growing a go, you might have got a bit of land, it is the future. It is the future.
Absolutely.
And we've got to get back to real
exciting future it is, I think.
So brilliant. And if you can find somewhere to get some raw milk, wherever you are, try it. See what happens. It would be lovely.
You won't be disappointed.
Brilliant stuff. Well, thank you so much, Sir Julian. Really appreciated that.
Not at all.
I will be back with more monologues and more wonderful interviews just like this one. But in the meantime, from Sir Julian and myself, thanks for watching and goodbye.
Goodbye.